So we got, like I said, Jason and Luis from the SSDP team. If you remember, they were with us week 1 at the welcome at the outset of this. SSDP has been great partners with SMART in bringing this entire program together. So it's really only right that we end the sessions with the SSDP focus session where they can really get into how community organizing not only is just important, which you all have learned throughout these sessions, but how it can be executed and what you all can be doing on your respective campuses to be pushing for change, which is what it's all about. And then obviously making sure that we're getting more people to help push. So we got Jason and Luis. I'm going to kick it over to Jason. I think you're starting off. But before we do that, we're going to get some intros. Jason, one more time, what did you want from the students? You got, obviously name. Tell us what you want from us real quick.
For sure. So yeah, name, school, and one campaign, policy, event, or some project that you think you're interested in learning how you would accomplish it in the next semester.
All right, so name, school, one policy or one thing you'd like to change in the upcoming semester that you might have been thinking about already. All right, who wants to kick it off this week? And then, we're gonna do popcorn style. Or y'all want me to pick somebody? Just go ahead, take yourself off mute.
I don't mind going first. Greetings, I am DeAndre Smith. I'm currently pursuing my doctorate of pharmacy with a minor in food science at Florida A&M University. One thing I would like to learn more about this year or change is just the access to medical marijuana cards. Since we're gonna be having this issue a lot, we might as well get more people registered. That way we can combat it and then switch everybody to the legal system.
Who are you gonna kick it over to, DeAndre?
I got Toby.
I knew it. Good afternoon or good evening. I am Toby Montoya. I'm a second year chemistry master's student at Howard University. So I was thinking about policy, and I think a policy I would like to maybe not necessarily change, but get people talking about is the fact that our campus is a dry campus. Although we're in the middle of Washington, D.C., and even I think they're decriminalizing psychedelics at this point. So I guess making a policy in which there is some type of safe space on campus to consume compared to you potentially getting robbed. So yeah, that's what I want to work on.
Okay.
I forgot. Popcorn to Asila.
Hello, can y'all hear me? Okay, great. Hello, I am Asila Greenwood. I go to the Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. For me, one of the things that I've been interested in most with policy change is the medical marijuana card versus gun license. And just, marijuana in general, when you see it's legal versus gun license, I don't know, it's interesting to me. I'm hoping to change it or to get some type of guidance so the people that we serve and help in our community don't have to give up one right for another.
Popcorn, Sheila.
Sorry, let me look.
You good.
I'll popcorn it to Caleb.
Hello, my name is Caleb Sproul. I go to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a junior biology pre-med major. And something that I want to change, in the state of Georgia, marijuana is still mostly illegal. So I guess I would love to start with changing that aspect. If, I know we probably won't be able to make recreational use legal in the near future, but maybe we could at least do medical use. So yeah, that's me. And I would like to popcorn it to Mark.
Mark, I know you just hopped in. What we're doing is we're doing your name, your school, and one policy change that you would like to see or that you would like to work on your campus and your community, just generally would like to see this upcoming semester in the fall.
Can you hear me? All right, good evening. My name is Mark Randallson. I'm an anticipating doctor of pharmacy, a student at my HBCU, Xavier University of Louisiana. And mainly I'm interested in getting the policy on campus up to par with the state policy as far as being more sensible in comparison to alcohol and all the other policies that they have on campus. So since I just got in, I'm not sure who haven't went yet, so I'd like to popcorn into it.
You got Justin, you got Eve.
I feel like you was trying to get some brown nose points right there with the sensible drop. I don't know.
Yeah, man. Hey, we gotta keep it sensible. You know, my sensible SSDP family, so you know we gotta keep it sensible.
Who you gonna pass it over to, Mark? You got Eve, you got who else is Justin is in here. You got
All right, let's go to Eve.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for joining late. A storm is going on right now in DC, so I had to fix my connection. But my name is Eve Ellis. I go to Spelman College. I'm an independent major, documentary film minor, and I'll be a sophomore in about a week.
And then Eve, what's one policy change you would like to see this upcoming semester?
I
know you just hopped in, so if you want to think on it and come back and type it in the chat, that's cool.
Okay, I'm gonna just type it in the chat because my mind, I'm thinking like of a couple. So
Good.
yeah,
Okay. Okay, and make sure you stay safe out there in that storm. Can you popcorn it to, we got Justin, Scotty, either one of those.
I'll popcorn it to Justin.
Hello, my name is Justin Merritt. I'm an incoming first year biology graduate student focusing on immunology and researching the way different phytochemicals could be used to help strengthen the immune system and fight diseases. One policy I like to change is one that's been already mentioned is getting rid of the archaic law where I got to trade one of my rights for the other, because I like to be able to keep my pistol on me while also healing my anxiety, stress, PTSD, and all the other host of medical illness I got, which marijuana treats.
Dope. And then we got Scotty. Scotty, we got you in the chat. Scotty says, he's also a junior at North Carolina Central University. He's on the football team and is getting ready for football meetings. So he popped in the chat and let us know one policy he'd like to change on campus is decriminalizing cannabis and allowing a safe space for students to learn about cannabis. So appreciate you checking in while you still can, Scotty. You know, we had a replay available for you as well. I think, did I miss anybody? Did we get everybody? I think that's everybody. Okay, Jason, Luis, y'all got the floor.
I'm ready. All right, you wanna click into the next slide? Perfect. And so, yeah, my name is Jason Ortiz. I'm the executive director of SSDP. I've been about a year in the role now, and I was actually someone who was arrested for cannabis possession in high school as a student. That's what kind of brought me into the movement. I was lucky enough to have folks like y'all and the various cannabis activists change the Higher Education Act's federal aid elimination penalty, which is a really long word to say you can't get financial aid if you have a drug crime on arrest or conviction. And luckily, folks changed it, and I was able to go to the University of Connecticut where I graduated and find SSDP as a chapter member, worked on the national board for a few years, went and did some work in trying to end the death penalty movement nationally before coming back to the cannabis industry as a founder of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, which I did a lot of cannabis work and specifically drafting equity policies at the state level. This is actually a shirt from a campaign we did here in Connecticut when we just did the legalization of cannabis statewide. It's a lot of mixed results on how that's going now, but we did get the bill passed in the moment. And so I've got a lot of experience at different levels, and I've also done a lot of electoral campaigns for Democrats to run for state office, local office, and everything in between. But I'll kick it over to Luis to do a quick intro before I dive into the program.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Montoya. I'm the operations director of SSDP. I've been with the organization for about six and a half years now. I was a volunteer, led my chapter actually down at Florida International University to push medical marijuana in Florida. I also worked with the campus police department to get naloxone onto campus to begin addressing the opioid epidemic, because we were beginning to see the first trends around 2014, 2015, and the conversation was still not being had. Similar to Jason, I've been working with this organization for a long time. I've helped now hundreds, I want to say thousands of students across the US and in countries in Europe and Africa. So I've been doing this for a hot minute. I've seen kind of all the various ways that, political landscape, your talking points, your ability to like find the right support, all of the things that sort of go into getting a successful chapter going, as well as all of the things that kind of contribute to a chapter falling apart. So please definitely, ask me questions, any questions that you have about SSDP, the kind of work that we do, the kind of work that you could do. More than happy to, provide that context and ideas for how to move forward.
Thank you, Luis. And so before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, this is a workshop we're going to be, you can go to the next slide, talking specifically about community organizing. And there are lots of different philosophies in community organizing, giving you my perspective about what I think has worked for me as an SSDPer over the years, but definitely there can be whole master's degree programs of community organizing. I actually did individualize in public and community engagement when I was at school. And so this is the first of many conversations that I hope this workshop will spark. But one of the things I wanted to, make sure we say beforehand that this is really going to be focused on policy change and how you can use policies to bring communities together to address real problems. And so it isn't a workshop necessarily on how to function as a chapter, your kind of basic president treasurer roles. Luis will touch on that, but SSDP has tons of resources on that as well. What this workshop is going to be is once you all form your chapter, you decided some internal priorities and specified something you want to work on, actually implementing a plan to get from an idea to victory. And so if there's anything that we're missing along the way, feel free to drop it in the chat. We're also going to try to go through the presentation quickly. It will be a lot of information, a lot of text, but when it comes to community organizing, it's very contextual. So I want to leave as much time as possible for questions at the end. And I have some examples of campaigns that have happened at the end. And so that way we can really talk to your campus and your community, how you might do it with real specificity. The other thing is, this is all pulled from our resolution to advance sensible drug policy, which is a municipal level resolution, so like city council level. And a lot of things are framed at the city council level. Happy to explain how it'd be different for a state or a campus, but for the most part, a lot of the philosophies that are in there still apply wherever you're going to change policies. You just need more power or different power, depending on which part of government or society you want to change. We can go to the next one. So I have here 10 easy steps to change the world. And it is definitely, each line has a lot to it. We're going to go into a few different details. I've broken it into 4 basic phases. So the first phase is coalition building. So building enough power necessary to actually impact the level of government that you want to change. And the 3 first steps there are, first, being able to answer, why do you want to decriminalize drug offenses in your community? So being able to answer the question of, why are you doing this? You also want to make sure you found out the process for changing laws in your locality. That depends on what kind of law you want to change, who actually has the power to change it. It could go anywhere from the president all the way down to, an administrator at your school. And then lastly, in that particular phase, identifying allies and developing your coalition. Generally speaking, you're really unable to change any policy if it's just one person or one group advocating for it. You're only going to have enough momentum and pressure necessary once multiple groups start getting involved, and now you're leveraging lots of people power. And so that will always be before you actually introduce anything. Oh, someone have a question? All right. So yeah, but just before you introduce anything or even really approach any elected officials, you want to be able to do those first three things. Answer the question of why you want to do this, know how it can actually be changed, and know who and have already approached and got buy-in from additional supporters. The second phase, once you feel like you've got a handle on the first one, you want to actually start engaging with elected officials and identifying your legislative champions, opponents, and those in between. So if you're going to be talking about a city council, there could be 5 city council folks, there could be 40, right? So like New York City Council has like 100 city aldermen, is what they're called there. And so depending on exactly what your situation is, you're going to have to decide who's more with you, who's not so with you, and who's likely to actually try to stop you. And the best way to do that is to set up meetings with them, every single one of them, including your opposition, to find out where everybody's at, and then ranking them on a support system from 1 to 5. Then lastly, when you kind of gone through everybody, somebody hopefully in that mix sounds like a good person to be your champion, the person to actually introduce your legislation to that governing body. And depending on what their background is will determine kind of the path to victory there. But once you actually have a piece of legislation like live in the government, now points of decision emerge where people actually have to vote on your legislation. And so you want to be able to mobilize your chapter members, your allies around those points of decision. You want to use the press, because they're going to be one of your best allies in the situation, to frame your narrative the way you want to frame things as the dominant narrative, or how everybody is talking about it, right? And so I think, for example, the cannabis equity movement was pretty good at making their frame the dominant narrative because folks had to address cannabis equity for any bill to pass. As you're working that out and trying to make the best case for your policy possible, you'll have to compromise. To some extent, you're going to have to say which parts of your bill, your policy, you're willing to shrink or do less of, and which ones you're not. And so sometimes you're going to have to give up some really favorite parts in order to get the core passed. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You are advancing society and changing the world, and it's always going to be some amount of compromise necessary. And then lastly, calling for a vote. You want to make sure that you're not letting your campaign drag on too long and that you're pressuring the decision to happen so that momentum can stay with your side of the argument. And then lastly, whether you win or lose, reflecting on your work and appreciating your allies. You want to make sure at the end of any campaign that you're talking to folks, finding out what went well, what didn't go so well, learning from it, improving it, finding trainings you want to do things better, and making sure that you appreciate your allies and give them some shine and say thank you. Go to the next slide. All right, and so the first piece was all 10 steps, right? In theory, if you go from start to finish, you'll pass a bill or at least call a vote, but each one of those lines has a lot of prep work that needs to go into all of them. And so I want to take a minute to start with phase 1 and the question of why do you want to do this? And so it may not be decriminalizing drugs. It probably will be in a lot of spaces. It could be something like expanding access to medical procedures. It may be, why do you want to end our campus being a dry campus? But you should be able to answer that question in 30 seconds, in 2 minutes, and 5-minute versions. And so if someone asks me, like, why do I want to end the war on drugs? Because prohibition doesn't work. And if we really care about folks that are suffering from addiction or problematic drug use, we should be focused on policies that actually do help them. Right. And so that's a 30-second answer to that. And you can go on much longer if you want, right? And it depends on what form you're at. 2 minutes is the standard testimony time that you'll have at a city council or a state legislature. Sometimes it's 3, but you should definitely prep for 2 minutes. And so in those situations, you can actually write out your statement. You can often include more information than you're actually going to physically read when you submit your testimony, but 2 minutes is a really good number to think about. It's 120 seconds. It's also pretty much what they'll use if you get to talk to the press. They'll either use 30 seconds or 2 minutes. But the 5-minute version is more if you're speaking in front of a group. If you're trying to inspire them to join you, you're going to tell more about your personal story. You're going to expand on the specifics of the policy, and you have a captive audience and they're there for you. So you tend to only use the 5-minute version when it's a very friendly audience. And so we're going to talk a bit more about storytelling towards the end of this workshop, but just want to put that out there that you definitely need 3 different versions of the same answer. Secondly, we're going to talk about the actual laws that you want to change. And so I've heard a few different things. There are some that are campus policies. There's some that's decrim at the municipal level. Some folks are mad about the federal policies around gun ownership, because that's actually a federal level decision that happens at, and state laws and everything in between, right? So for your campus, it could be something that your student affairs office is in charge of, could be Res Life, and finding out whether or not the director of Res Life or the director of student affairs is the one that ultimately makes that decision is something that you can generally just ask them. It is possible that the board of your university would have to decide on a particular policy if it's significant enough. The example of changing your campus to not be a dry campus anymore, it is highly likely that the board of the university would have to vote on making that happen. So you know not to spend a ton of time trying to convince the director of student affairs and the director of Res Life if they're not actually the ones that are going to make the decision. So you want to make sure you're focusing on that particular person, that particular governing body. Depending on if it has to do with the police, it also could be a mayor decision or a city council decision. If your campus uses state police, which is something that happens often, it may have to be a state law that gets changed. So being really specific in the laws that you want to change and finding out where that decision made will make sure that when you go to your allies and say, hey, we want to do this and this is why, you can speak from real clear understanding of the how. How are we actually going to change this? And it could be, we're going to do it by submitting a resolution through city council that will then demand that there's an ordinance made to change this policy, or we're going to shut down a university board meeting until they decide to take up this issue, right? There's a little more clarity there, and you're more likely to be able to recruit folks when you have a really clear understanding of how you can actually win. The other thing with allies is you often want to go to the folks that are already closest to you, people that you know, people that are already supportive, but it is more powerful, generally speaking, if you're able to reach out to other movements and bring on other folks that are interested in environmentalism or housing rights or entrepreneurship, right, that can join your effort that are unlikely allies. If you're able to do that, you're going to pull from way bigger pools of people, and your university will see that it's not just this one person or this one radical group that wants to do something, but that the student body wants to do this. And that's when you have real power to actually push things. So there's always a question of intersectionality, where different issues overlap in interest, right? If we were talking about hemp's ability to reduce carbon in the atmosphere, that's definitely something that is both true and a good argument on its own. And maybe the environmentalists can come in to really back up that equation of what that means for our climate goals, our carbon sequestration goals. And you can express the benefit of the change in meeting a lot of different goals of the university or of the community, that then you build more allies that want to see your resolution pass, because it's going to benefit the goals and metrics that they're being measured by. Next slide. All right, so once you've actually had a chance to talk to some other organizations, get some feedback, and decide, yep, we're going to move forward on changing this particular policy, the next thing is to really take a look at whatever governing body it is, whether it be a state legislature or a city council, and start to analyze who the actual people are. And so this is both their political party, their age, how long they've been there, but also kind of who they are as a person. Some folks are very pro, young folks going out and changing things. Some folks are more conservative, and telling folks that, to pipe down and wait your turn, and everything in between, right? There's also on the issue itself, you'll have some folks that are very pro legalization and some folks that are very much not. And you want to know as much information as you possibly can. Example, if somebody had a really close race, they're going to have a different sort of perspective on everything than if they won with 80% of the vote. And so knowing all of that will definitely help you approach them. And then once you got done some background work and know a little bit about them, ask them directly, right? Including the folks that you think are probably going to be oppositional. And just usually they'll tell you that politicians can be a little slippery sometimes, exactly what they want to commit to and not commit to. But if they're non-committal, you can also write that down. But I normally use a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being they're definitely supportive and would co-sponsor the legislation, 5 being against and they would actively try to kill the legislation, 3 in the middle, 2 is leaning towards us, and 4 is leaning against. And so you can use more descriptive scales, right? You can use 1 to 10 if you want, but 10, I just want to know really, are they with us? Are they kind of with us, but not quite there yet, totally undecided, or are they opposition, or they figured a different way to neutralize them? And so when you do that, that's where a lot of chapter members can have different meetings with folks. You can kind of split up that labor depending on where people live and depending on the type of government. If there are geographic areas that they serve, you might be able to approach different ones as constituents. But hopefully, when you go through that process, you do find somebody that can be your champion, and wanting to build a positive relationship with them, supporting them in their elections, boosting their status, posting their beautiful picture on your social media, right? Like, politicians love getting that kind of attention from anybody, but especially from young folks. And so your ability to raise their stature among their peers is a source of power, right? If they're getting a lot of shine, that means when they want to run for something in the future, they'll have a lot more press to be able to run on than somebody that doesn't do work with the students. And so choosing that person is really important. And also, the person that is the strongest with us may not be the best champion if they don't have as much power within the government. So having the president of the city council introduce your legislation is more, it shows it's more likely to pass than a freshman city council person, right? But that person may not actually be with you on the issue and try to water your bill down at the end. And so that's definitely something you want to think about. The more progressive are the folks that are more aligned with you and their likelihood to do what you actually want versus working with somebody who's more powerful but may water down your bill. That's definitely always a question you're going to have to decide, but you do want to know who you are calling about this, who's your primary point of contact, who gets to say no or yes on a particular action, because they're going to be the person you're relying on to actually move the legislation within the governing body, and you don't want there to be confusion to the point where folks just disengage with the campaign. So I do recommend picking one person if possible, and making sure you have really steady communication with that person and feedback to hear what exactly you should be doing. And next slide. All right, now this is the fun part, right? And so once you actually have a piece of legislation introduced, you have a campaign going, you have an administrator that has been notified of the changes that you want, there's going to be all kinds of points of decision that will come up regardless if you host your own events or not, although you should. So things like city council meetings, board meetings, election day voting, budget fights, all of those different parts of the process are regularly scheduled. And so you can time your outreach or organizing your campaigns to go to those events. One of the good things about city council meetings is there's already press there. So anything that happens at your local city council will be reported on at the local paper or, website, whatever makes the most sense for the area. And so it's a naturally easy way to get press, especially at the beginning. Even just showing up in force by itself will likely get covered. So if you have more than 6 students show up for something, you'll probably get some press over, especially if you have a really good public statement to be able to, say something controversial and get the conversation flowing. And so I definitely would always tell folks to organize around those points of decision, because there's already a natural energy there and you'll be able to get the most bang for your organizing buck. Whereas if you kind of do a protest on your own, you got to pull the press to you, you got to pull the elected officials to you. While not impossible, it is definitely a little more difficult. But you can force the issue, because sometimes if you just leave it up to them, they'll just keep delaying the decision over and over again for years and years, and you'll never force the actual vote. So you can set your own deadlines, right? And say, if we don't get a vote on this by September 30th, we're going to shut down your next city council meeting and all the city council meetings in the future until you take a vote on this, right? And so now they're going to have to decide how they respond to your demands. They may ignore it. If they ignore it, then you got to force the issue and actually show up and create your own point of decision where they have to decide how to respond to you. It takes more energy, but it's also more powerful if you're able to do that. And that's a direct action training that we can also come back to another time of all the best ways to do direct action, but it is very powerful. The best ally in this is going to be the press. So you definitely want to develop relationships with the press prior to doing anything, right? So looking at your local newspaper or local coverage and see who's already talking about drug policy, like Google marijuana decrim in Athens, Georgia, right? And see what you get, who pops up, who wrote that article. Did they cover it in a positive light or not? And if they covered it in a positive light, contact them. Say, hey, we're starting this campaign. We'd love to make you the point person for our press outreach. Can we just start sending you all of the alerts that come up? And they'll say, yeah, great, because reporters always have to create more content. But you got to give them something to cover, right? Like just doing things or just saying things isn't sufficient. You got to do something controversial. You got to call out a politician. You got to disrupt a meeting. You got to mess up somebody's day where something different has to happen because now you're in town. And so when you're thinking about that, you always want to make sure you're encouraging all the different folks in your team to contact the local press and get relationships with them and maybe even join them. If you could get someone in your chapter to write for the newspaper, that's going to be a direct line to free press and maybe even an internship or job for them. So if you have somebody that is inclined to be part of the press or in the media, helping them figure out how to get a job, and there's going to be well worth their time. And then lastly, opinion pieces. You can write an op-ed for your major paper on any subject you want and submit it to the paper to be published. And I get published a lot, especially when there's a legislative fight happening. They always want to hear voices from folks that are organizing. And so it costs you nothing and you can get printed in your major newspaper. And in that op-ed, call out the mayor, right? Say the mayor is the responsible for not letting students have the knowledge they need to be safe and successful. And all of this unnecessary harm that's happening is because that mayor won't do the right thing, right? If you're somewhat controversial, isolate a target and actually make sure you see why it is their decision that's holding up the process. It'll likely get published. Same thing with the city council president, right? If they refuse to take a vote, talk about the problems that are currently existing, and that if they would only vote on this policy, those problems would get more likely to be addressed. And so once you've fought it out a little bit in the press, now you're going to be in a negotiation, right? And in a negotiation, you're going to have to compromise. Whether you want to say, nope, we're going to stick to everything in the bill and we're not taking any compromises, and then it doesn't get passed, that's a strategic choice you have to make with your coalition. You may say, all right, we'll take off the part that says specifically how much cannabis somebody can hold, right? They may ask you to go from an ounce to, we're only going to decrim anything over 1 gram or 4 grams or 15 grams. And you're going to have to negotiate at that amount and decide where your value system is going to be like, okay, I guess over a ½ ounce, we can settle for that, right? But that's definitely something you want to talk to yourselves and other folks beforehand to kind of know where you're willing to give and where you're not. And then lastly, any campaign that lasts more than a year, right? Like without a serious vote on the table or some advancement will start to lose momentum. Once you hit the summer, it's way harder to pressure anything. And it's when election starts, so things get a little bit tricky. So making sure you don't let the campaign lag on too long, or you decide we're going to pause it for now and come back after the next election or something to that effect, but force the vote. If they won't take a vote, disrupt their meeting and demand that they take a vote. And, you know, sometimes you can't force it. Sometimes you can if you have sufficient pressure. And that always depends on who these elected officials are. But definitely don't feel like you have to go by their timetable. Talk to your champions, of course, and make sure everything is sufficient. But there are plenty of times where even your champion will say, I can't move this. And so you're going to have to come turn up and, you know, disrupt some shit for this to actually move forward. And they'll be able to support you and speak to why you're doing that. And so at that point, when you call for a vote, either there will be one or not, you'll pass it or you won't. So that at least gives you some information. Okay, our outreach worked on person 1, didn't work on person 2. We were 1 vote away. We could have did something different. Or if you got soundly defeated, you know, 2-7, then you know you have a lot more education that you're going to have to do to get folks ready to actually back that. Could be more press work, could be more educational events, could be building a bigger chapter, could be changing what you're demanding. But at least at that point, you know what we did and what we didn't do. Yeah, and then the last phase, this is really important, especially like as semesters end and folks graduate, you know, people are changing, leadership changes. You want to make sure you thank folks. I think this is one of the more underrated parts of organizing. We work really hard together. People make a lot of sacrifices, and being able to thank your allies, have a pizza party where you debrief how everything went, right? And like talk to folks, let them tell you, well, I thought this part was really cool. This other thing was whack. And so you know what to do again and what not to do again. but definitely like plan to do this and make sure you have folks in your group that are dedicated on this. Even if it's just a quick check-in, I think it's really important to reflect so that the folks that are coming after you, the freshmen when you're a senior, right, they'll have all of that internal knowledge and they'll be starting 10 steps ahead of where you came from. And that's how we build movements, right? If we can share this knowledge, share the information, generation after generation, then your chapter will continue on after you and will continue to do big and badder things. And so will you. You'll be able to rise to higher spaces and still feel like you have a strong support network that can help you do big things. And so those allies will be future legislators, future lawyers, future newspaper owners and editors. And so you never know where somebody that was really thankful to have worked with you ends up in a really important position where now you can work together to do things you even think possible. So definitely reflecting, taking time to appreciate folks and making sure the next generation learns from what y'all did is always a part of community organizing. And so this is just something that I personally really like talking about, and I think is really important, is the role of storytelling for social change. There's this book, Reimagining Change by Smart Meme. They're actually called the Center for Story-Based Strategy right now. But the amount of times that we use stories in community organizing and policy change is constant and vital. So there's a quote here that actually talks about how the world is shaped by stories. Whether or not somebody agrees with you on a policy is based on what story about that policy you're telling them and what stories they already have in their head. We know all of the stigma that is around drug use is because of some really ridiculous stories that were sent to the masses for hundreds of years for political purposes. So in order for us to win, we have to tell even better stories that have new characters, new plot lines, and new endings for how these different processes are going to go so that people can imagine what a different world looks like. Far too often, people get really stuck in the negativity of what is happening in the world and things are really difficult to change and often don't know what to do. Our ability to tell a story of what we're going to do can change that person's life, can change how they see the world. And if you can do that to tens, hundreds, and thousands of people, you can do pretty much anything you want, right? And I think we see it in political campaigns. Telling an individual story of who they are and where they come from can really impact entire communities, and how the different focus on who are the central characters in the story, who are the villains and who are the heroes in the story, right? Being able to change the script on how people look at different things will make it possible to build, not just imagine, but actually create the better world, right? So for a good example, the way we talk about drug dealers, right, and people that sell weed has changed radically, right? And so that was one of the most demonized people in the drug policy space, right? Were folks that sold drugs, these bad people that sold drugs. When in reality, it was folks like myself selling weed to my friends, right? And so by me saying, I've been a drug dealer my whole life and graduated from college, started businesses, lead nonprofits, led movements, and also sold drugs, changed how we had a whole conversation of why are we legalizing cannabis to begin with. A lot of times they would say, well, we got to get it in the hands out of the drug dealers. And I would say, no, that's not at all why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I don't want my family and friends to go to jail. I don't have any ill will towards the drug dealers. They're trying to make money, trying to do what they got to do. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, just like in any profession, but they're not inherently evil just because they sell drugs. And I'm one of them. So by centering myself as a character in that new story, sitting in a suit and tie in the state legislature changes how the entire state legislature will talk about drug users and drug dealers. So the power of this is just really incredible. And I think once we look through it, you'll know some of the stories you've heard over the years, right, and how they had an effect on you. And this particular book is like 50 pages. It's very heavy. I'm going to send it to everybody right after this workshop, but it is incredibly powerful manual for social change. And so this is a quote that's from that book that I just have always loved when thinking about how to mobilize people, right? Far too often we just think about the tactics we're going to do when it comes to we're going to do a protest or we're going to do an event. But really, it's not the specific details that mobilize people. It's actually giving them the urge and the desire to do great things together. If people feel genuine urge and desire to do great things together, the details will happen and folks will be more motivated to do that. But if you want to build a ship, you don't herd people together to collect wood and don't assign them tasks and work. but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. One thing that we all have the ability to do is tell the story of how the world would be better if the changes we wanted were implemented, or if I was in charge, the world would be great, right? But being able to then tell your community the place they fit in that story, right? Yes, we want to be able to travel the world, and you get to ride cockpit in this journey, right? So they can see themselves in that journey. And so I think that's a big part of who we are. We all have the power to do that. You don't have to be a lawyer, you don't need any special training. We can all give our experience and empower folks and inspire folks. And that is the roots of community organizing. You're going to absorb a lot of people that are hurt by society or dealing with something difficult, or maybe gone through something difficult. Absorbing what they've gone through and giving them hope is a big part of what community organizing is all about. And hopefully by using the 10 steps we had before, having a plan gives people hope as well, right? So you can say, don't worry, we're going to do this policy. This is where we're going to go. We're going to force the mayor to make this no longer a dry campus, and we need you to be there so that we can get it done. You can pretty much do anything you need if you're able to do that from that point forward. But I'll stop there. That's my 10 steps to changing the world. And I'm happy to take any questions about specific campaigns. And also for everybody that's on the call, I love talking about storytelling for social change and doing follow-up trainings on that. And so I'll send over the doc, and yeah, we'll take it from there. And as folks are on campus, if something comes up, you're about to have a press interview or something, definitely feel free to hit us up, and we're happy to practice with you.
All right, we got any questions? That was amazing, Jason. Thank you so much for bringing us through that. Definitely, I would say follow up with Jason if you have any questions. It's definitely a great handbook on how you can drive change in your community. So if there are any questions, make sure y'all unmute yourselves. Jason, if you want to drop your, never mind, you just did. And I would probably say that's the best way to reach Jason, obviously, as well, too. Not to add him on LinkedIn too, don't get me wrong, it's in the handbook. But if you really want to have a conversation with him, like I said, very inspiring and understanding firsthand how to enact change, definitely reach out via email. Questions? This might be a first. You have literally blank.
Actually, I forgot, I have a couple of photos I wanted to show.
Okay, let me let you share your screen. How about that?
It should work.
Yep, you should be able to.
Let's see. It says host disabled participant screen share.
Why would I do something like that?
It's right. I'll send it around in this email I'm about to send folks. They'll get the hint.
Definitely. All right, cool. Any questions? We're good on questions. Before we let Jason and Luis go, did anybody want to kind of talk through anything going on at your school? This might also be a great quick time to get a couple of thoughts out. But if not, we'll let Jason and Luis go. Nadir and I will handle some kind of follow-up items.
Yeah. I don't know why you can't. All right, Asila, go ahead first.
Hello. Yeah, I just had a quick question. So this was like a very powerful presentation. I do feel like I learned a lot, but it was having me thinking. So like, do you have any suggestions on like the research for policy change? Because I know me personally, I get nervous talking to people like that, knowing like, you know, where they sit, how much power they have. So do you have any suggestions on how to navigate that?
Yeah, so it depends on who they are, right? So before a city council person, definitely just do a quick Google search for press first, because generally before they ran, they had to fill out a number of questionnaires for different groups, and all of those will come up, right? And so some folks are better than others, right? You know what I mean? But there's a lot of those questionnaires that'll tell you a lot of specific policies. So same thing with a state rep. Those are also similar. Mayors too, right? Governors, less so, right? Like the higher you go up, the less they just are like filling out questionnaires. But for the most part, you can get a pretty good feeling on whenever they got elected, what were they talking about when they got elected? If there's somebody that is brand new, you may not have anything, right? The other interesting piece is depending on what time, what set part of government you're targeting, asking the other part of government is a good way to get information. So if I'm talking to my city council, ask your state rep about your city council people. And, you know, because like they will have their own information, their own backgrounds on that, and will give you sometimes really honest feedback, sometimes not, right? But they will love to talk to you about it. So that's another piece that I would think is a good way to go about it. But for the most part, you can get a good idea usually from just searching their press hits. And remember, they work for you, right? And so while they do have a lot of power, individually they don't. The government itself has a lot of power, but it's dispersed a lot. So they're always in a position where they want more power. So they're not looking at you necessarily, especially if you're just asking them questions as a potential opponent. They're looking at you as somebody that can help them win their next election. So remember, it's like they're seeking you out just as much as you might be for them, and more so, right? They need thousands of votes. You need 7, right? And so if you can help them get more votes, and the fact that you're a young leader of color, right, like on your campus, you already are bringing a lot of power into the room just based on who you are and what you represent. So they can be intimidating, but unless they're at the governor level, right, like they don't actually have that much power, and you have the power to mess up their day at any point. And that's something that is always in the back of their mind. So sometimes it's helpful to find a elected official that's sort of outside of that particular framing that you can support, you know, see if someone that's running that makes sense for you, and kind of get the lowdown with them first, and they'll help you feel more comfortable with the actual decision makers.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, I did have a question, but I think I found like information about my question via the documents, but I'll just say out loud. My question was about whether or not we have to be recognized on campus, and I saw a little tidbit. And then also, say we want to get active on our campus, the best mode of like being recognized by SSDP as someone, yeah.
So on our side of things, it's really easy. Y'all are already in the pipeline, right? And so, yeah, so it's like email Luis, he'll put your name in the queue and you'll get the documents, right? So it's like super easy. And we don't require your university to accept it, because sometimes the university will fight you on it. And we're there to help you make it happen, right? And so there's lots of possible situations there. Most campuses were fine, right? I would say 95% of the time, it's a very specific process of you need 4 leaders, your president, VP, treasurer, secretary, and a room to meet, right? And then you'll probably get recognized. Depends about the politics on your campus though. But that's definitely something that once you find out the actual policies for that, just contact Luis and he can help you work through the process.
Thank you both for such an amazing session. My question is for you, Jason. What is the most interesting campaign you ever ran?
Interesting. Definitely the cannabis legalization campaign in Connecticut was without a doubt the most interesting because it was the hardest and most fucked up, right? Like I felt like it was getting really in the mud of how bad and difficult politics could be, and we still fought and won a lot. Right. So interesting because it challenged me a lot, but it definitely wasn't necessarily the most fun campaign I ever worked on. And part of that was around the definition of equity. And so as somebody that had been writing policy for a long time, I actually got myself put on, long story how this happened, but on the governor's task force for licensing. And so determining what kind of policy proposals he would give. I was trying to force my definition of what equity should be, which is making sure that the positive benefits of legalization are appropriated into the communities most impacted by the war on drugs, and primarily, right? So where the money is going to go. My framing in this was about where the money is going to go. And his framing, right, was about which communities did he feel like geographically would be where the money would go. Where I was saying that people who had an arrest record should be who benefit the most, right? Now, the tension there is, it's not me and the governor having a debate and then somebody votes and who wins and then I just win. It's I have to take my framing and push it to the public. The governor is taking his framing and pushing it to the public, and you have all the legislators in the middle. So I needed 50 legislators to agree with me, 60 legislators to agree with me. And I started with champion Robin Porter. She was an African-American woman from New Haven, the chair of the Labor Committee. And I was able to get our bill through because she was the chair of the Labor Committee. So I made my bill very labor heavy, lots of great stuff for the labor unions in it. And my bill got to the floor, right? Where the governor sent his bill through the Judiciary Committee, which is the Criminal Justice Committee. Robin sits on that committee. So she tore up his bill when it was time to have the hearing on his bill, right? So my champion choice is really important. But once it got to the floor, there's 164 legislators in Connecticut. I needed 72, right? And so, but it's this constant battle in the press or in the public or the hearts and minds of regular people of what does equity mean, right? And it became a thing of, well, who gets to decide what equity means? Is it the billionaire white governor in Connecticut? Or is it the cannabis equity activist that's been doing this for many years? What ended up happening towards the end, I started to win that battle. HB 6377 became the primary bill that people would cite in all of the articles. So they attacked me as a person. So they actually said that I had a vested self-interest in things like home grow because I wanted to grow weed and sell it to people, right? And so it became this battle over why people want to legalize cannabis. And I made no qualms of saying, yeah, I want a license. I want to sell it legally. I want everybody to be able to sell it legally. And I want everybody to be able to sell it legally, not 5 people, right? He clearly wanted very specific corporations to sell it all, and we had to fight about it. And in the public, most people had no context whatsoever for the conversation. They didn't know what policies meant. They didn't know what any of this was. They supported legalization, but like, what is this equity thing? Licensing is not something most people talk about, but is so vital when it comes to deciding who gets to make the money off of cannabis, psychedelics, whatever it is. So having to both explain why licensing even exists to begin with when it comes to cannabis, and then why I should be able to get a license is hard in a 30-second story. And so it was just very complicated, right? Of like how many different moving pieces there were, how many representatives came out against me. So the Puerto Ricans were some of my biggest opponents, right? And so it was me as a young Puerto Rican fighting with the old Puerto Ricans about whether or not this is a good thing, whether or not selling cannabis is a thing we want to tell people to do. And so I had to address 100 years of stigma in the Latinx community just to get my state reps on my side. And it's like, this, I'm purposefully doing this so that our communities can benefit, and you're fighting me on it, right? But they also have their own interests, their own personal stakes in corporate programs, right? And that was part of it, was like realizing, oh shit, you're a sellout too, huh? Okay, right, now I see what's going on here. And having to pivot, right? Like, you were not an ally the whole time. So it was very complicated. It got very personal with like myself. There were friends that thought I was being too aggressive because I was going at the governor in the most aggressive form possible. And so I'll just give you an example. There was a part of equity that he tried to include in one version of the bill that said, if you hired 10 people that would be equity applicants, then your company would be an equity applicant. So that meant if you were the biggest company in the world, let's say, evil company X, I don't want to throw anybody on the bus on this one, right? But like evil company X decides they're a $1 billion company, they're going to hire 10 Black people to be janitors. Now they get to be an equity company, right? This is wild. Like, that is not at all what equity is trying to be. It's not about just giving a few people jobs. It's like they should own the whole business. So when they introduced that bill, I asked other equity activists if anyone else ever dealt with this. And the Illinois folks said, oh yeah, they did. That's called the slave master's clause. Right. And I was like, the what? And so I looked it up. I Google searched Illinois. Is there any press on this? There were 2 press hits that cited that term, right? The slave master's clause. So as soon as I heard that, we did a press conference and said, we oppose the slave master's clause. People were like, you oppose the what? Right. And so the governor had to explain why he included the slave master's clause in his bill. And so that narrative, right, and like that conversation and how the public says, you want to do what? Now everybody is like, oh, hell no, we ain't listening to the governor. He's going to do some of that kind of shit, right? And so Robin, state representative, she's also one of the baddest ladies in the whole building, right, came out strong with it. And folks were like, damn, Jay, you really going at this dude. Like, you're not holding back. And we got it out, right? Like, they pulled it out of the bill. And that was the beginning of like, take this bad shit out over and over and over again, right? We didn't have home grow for a long time in the bill. We ended up getting it in through another serious fight, right? So that type of battle was kind of new to me. It wasn't as like technical, we just need people to go to this thing. It was very much thinking on social media, what are we going to do? I was able to use the the tag and drag tactic a lot, where you tag an elected official and say something really controversial, like you're selling out the Puerto Rican community, right? And then the press report on your posts, right? And now your social media becomes a source of news, right? And that's what Trump does really well. But also, if you're able to do it really well, I was getting calls from state reps within half an hour of posting something because it got 100 shares, right? And so there are lots of different ways you can use that narrative fight in your own backyard, beat him at it, right? Because I couldn't beat him in the traditional press, but I could beat him on Instagram.
All right, Jason, I think we got one last question. I was just about to wrap because I know we're getting close on time, but I think DeAndre might have a last question I just saw in the chat.
No, my bad. This was your question that he was answering. So that's
okay.
Yeah.
So one last question if anybody else wants to go.
Thank you. Great answer. Thank you so much.
I'll include the article with the slave master's clauses. Y'all.
Jason, I was gonna also say, I know we have a few students in Georgia, nobody in Athens, but I know about, obviously the work going on there. If you want to send me a couple of those articles or anything on that, gladly will share with the students after the call.
Absolutely. And if you look up Athens, Georgia, SSDP, cannabis decrim, or anything like that, a lot of stuff will pull up. But I'm going to send a bunch of stuff right after this call.
Perfect. Awesome session. Let's give a round of applause to our amazing guests, Jason and Luis from SSDP, coming through on community organizing to kind of round out our workshops for the summer. Thank y'all so much. We appreciate it. We'll look out for those documents so that we can share those after. Thank you for inspiring and empowering us as we get ready to get these students back to college campus and doing what they've been prepped now for 6 weeks to do.
Yeah, and again, if anything comes up, you get a tense moment, you want to work through it with us, I'd love to help. I love going through that. And if we need to come bring some extra boots on the ground for you, just let us know. Come through.
All right, Mark, we'll get you those resources from SSDP. He's just asking about what sort of resources are available. We'll send through a couple of documents, but the resources obviously are being able to contact Jason and Luis as well. When you have anything going on or you want to ask any questions about something that might be going on your campus and what might be the best strategy. Obviously don't, we've talked about before, just calling people just to pick their brain. Don't do that. But at the same time, understand that people who have obviously done it, Jason, firsthand experience, is a great resource to you. All right.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. That was definitely one of the most meaningful, conversations that I've heard in a long time, and definitely is like why we wanted to do this program in the first place. And so I'm glad we could end on that. Specifically, even for myself, like I've been doing this for a long time, so to hear you say that in that way has definitely meant a lot to me, and just to see all of you here does that for me as well. So DJ as well. So I'm getting super emotional up here recently, just kind of reflecting, like as mentioned, on all that is in this space, because it's really not easy.
Most def. We appreciate you too, Nadir, man. This has been a definite a labor of love and teamwork, man. Everybody making sure that we can bring this program together for these students, knowing that they're about to hit their campus and do some amazing things. It really is touching that we had so many people supporting us, dating back to, Nadir and Jason were talking about this even last year, and then we've been working on it all this year. So definitely a great way to close out the sessions. We got a couple of quick kind of housekeeping items that we'll touch on afterwards. So if y'all can just stay on for a few minutes, we'll make sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Jason and Luis, if y'all want, I would prefer if y'all stay on just to see this stuff and, you know, kind of what we're expecting for folks to do. You know, as mentioned, like, in New Jersey, we won't even touch homegrown right now because of the way shit is set up, right? Like, because of the police state that we have in Jersey, Jersey's like top 3 in arrests in cannabis, like in this country. And so like, that's not even something that we go to talk about at this point. We're like, how do we make medical better? How do we get more people onto medical? Because we just want to have less interactions with the police. Like, however we can limit interactions with the police is the goal right now, right? It's like, if there's no homegrown, now they can come into your home because you might be growing something, right? It's like, we don't want that. That's why we want homegrown mainly, right? It's not because we want to grow in our homes, because we don't want you to think we're growing something and now you have a right to come into my home. Like, that's how I think about this, right? And, you know, as mentioned, like, there's so much stuff that doesn't even make sense. You could have 6-pack of beer and a shotgun, right? In Alabama right now. No questions asked, you know what I mean? But like, you can't have a plan in a shotgun, right? So these are things that just don't quite add up, right? Just on a basic level. But there's so much history and connotations tied into it, and it's like not that simple, right? And that's the sad truth. But it is the thing that kind of set me off even in this conversation was just like still thinking about the positivity, the story that you can tell, the things that you can create and do, because that is all very possible. I think about like, you know, Amber Center, you know, the folks on the West Coast, like in Gorilla RX, like they're literally like changing law, like even Chanel Lindsay, like changing laws so people can do things. Like, people are changing laws. I think you understand that. Like, these are the things that are getting codified, right? That people have to abide by. Billion-dollar corporations have to abide by these rules, right? So it's like, that is a power that is unparalleled, right? And so that's why these, you know, even at the municipal level, you know, the local level, you know, it all starts there. And it's something that like, even me as a very cynical person has had to, you know, come to grips with, right? In terms of, you don't want to play by these bureaucratic rules, but you have to play by the rules. And you know, there's this tug of war with life. So all that's to say is, again, this is meaningful work. I'm excited that y'all are doing it with us and choosing this ride with us. And we're going to start sharing a little bit on